Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksiv, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode: Materialism, Spirituality, and the Soul.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Created in the Image of God. I'm your partial co-host that introduces the tonight's guest. I'm really happy to do so. We've got Peter Merrick in the studio. Peter Merrick and I we were introduced through a LinkedIn post, I think. He's a very interesting man, as you guys will see in tonight's episode, as we delve into the topics of spirituality and materialism. And I think the apropos phrase to bring into this conversation is moral compass. So Peter's going to discuss later on in the show a little bit of how he attunes his moral compass and where he grabs the inspiration for that. So that's very exciting. Peter, welcome to the show. I want to ask you a few things about your formative years, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about your childhood.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. So I'd like to know, and I'd like you to share with the audience, I'd like you to warm up the audience to give them a little bit of a background of where Peter Merrick came from, how you developed your business acumen, how you developed your moral sense, a little bit about your family background, and maybe a little bit about your religious influences.
Well, thank you. So let me share with you a little about myself. I was born in Toronto, Canada. So I'm a Canadian, such as yourself, Daniel. I was born in the city of Toronto. I lived in the city of Toronto most of my life. I don't reside in Toronto anymore. I live in San Diego. My parents were both first-generation Canadians. Both sets of my grandparents came from Eastern Europe back in the late 20s and the early 30s. So that had a huge influence on me. I saw the rise of my city. It was voted by the UN for a number of years to being the greatest city in the world, and that's past tense because it is a different city now. I grew up in what you would call a fireplace family. My mother and dad were married until my father passed away at 59, about 25 years ago. And I went to university. I was very active in student politics. I was on my way to law school when I started working at a brokerage firm, and this is back in 1991. And I decided I wasn't going to law school, and my mother was very upset about it. However, I decided I was going to be a stockbroker. And at that time, for that 10-year period, there was a ride. That's when people were switching out of CDs in the United States or GICs, the equivalent in Canada, and they were just going into mutual funds. Everybody was going to manage money. And part of that had to do with the baby boom. And another reason I went into the financial sector, because there were only two sectors that were really available at that time for Gen Xers, which I am. And that was the technology field, and that was also the financial field. And it was a great ride. And during that time, I found out that I wasn't the best salesman that I wanted to be. So I walked over to a bookstore that was in the Guinness Book of Records as being the largest bookstore. And I ended up buying books. And at that point, I got really angry at myself after a while because my parents had paid for my university. And then I went on a 25-year period where all I did was read 1 to 3 books a week. And I wasn't reading fiction, I was reading nonfiction. And after a while, it starts creeping into your being. But where I am now, around 2016, 17, I started looking at mainstream television programs and things like that. And I had really missed out what had happened in our culture. Because I had worked with entrepreneurs my entire career. And these were people who were very traditional, very self-reliant. And I didn't understand what had happened to our country. And I'm going to share with you some of the breaks I had where it caused me to step back and question where our society is going, who our leaders are. And that's about myself.
Okay, I've got two questions for you, and I'm hoping that you can suspend both questions and then pick and choose how you want to answer those two questions in one kind of cohesive answer. I've challenged people this before, and then you start to expand the number of questions, and it kind of gets more difficult to see a through answer. But I think it's really good to reflect on some of the information you just gave. So the first question is, and so hold off until I say the second question. The first question is, how prevalent and relevant is your current understanding and practice of financial guy, right? Like the financial guy. How relevant is it to the Peter today? Okay, that's one of the questions. And then the other question is, give me a few examples of these nonfiction books, and did you stay contained to a genre? Damn it, that's 3 questions. Can you do that?
I'll try, but I'm going to throw in several fiction as well, because to me, nonfiction and fiction are just the same. It's just a human being giving their opinion, and hiding behind a narrative, you can get away with a lot. So regarding the financial, how does it help me? Well, I know how to read a spreadsheet. I know how to use an Excel sheet. And I also have spent thousands of hours understanding the Income Tax Act of Canada and understanding the Canada-US tax treaty. So that gives me a perspective. On top of that, I know people in the industry, so I'm able to go behind the curtain, and I know what's really happening, and it gives me a perspective that maybe other people don't have such a broad understanding, because that's the place where I focused on. And I was a university prof over at Ryerson teaching finance, and I was a columnist for Canada's largest accounting publication for CPAs for about 18 years. So it's just part of me, but there's so much else. Am I male? Am I Canadian? Am I a father? Am I a husband? Am I a financial guy? Like, it's just so many other things. I think one of the problems in our society is people look at people and they put labels on it. And I'll answer.
Well, okay. I'm trying to wrangle this in a little bit.
Yes, go for it.
I ask very broad questions to start off with. It might be the philosopher in me, and I think the thing is that if I'm watching this show and I'm trying to, and I'm an ultra wealthy person looking to move into United States, Peter might be a good person to have a conversation with today, right now, right? Is that would be the case?
I would be the gateway drug.
Oh, okay. This is exciting. All right, Ralph. Okay. So you speed it up, and it's an exciting ride to talk with Peter about how to do that in an ethical way, right? On one hand.
For sure.
And
there's rules.
You've got that experience. Okay. That's interesting. All right. That's important. I think if I was watching this, I'd say, oh, is he the guy? Like, he's the guy that I would talk to. Okay. So that's good. Give me an example of a nonfiction book. Are we talking nonfiction like, the top 10 ways to, become wealthy, whether you're a barber or not, sort of thing? Or what are these books you're talking about?
Well, like you and I would go and agree on the Republic as something, because you want to go to the basis of a society.
Mm-hmm.
Other books that I found recently very helpful is Power versus Force by David Dawkins, where I realized that in our society, what we've done is we ignore the most precious gift, and we're going to be talking about that, is our intuition. We've been given that by God or whatever, because we have access to so much information, and that book is such a great primer to start doing that. And I will share with you, I remember I knew one of the greatest bond traders in Canada, and he used to tell me, and this guy was able to do incredible trades, and his whole way of doing it had nothing to do with computers. It's like how he felt the market was behaving.
Mm.
It was all about how he felt, and that's how this person made a lot of money. And a lot of us have outsourced things that are innate and given to us. So that book's very powerful. I don't know if anybody's read Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. It is an essential book. This individual was a longshoreman. President Eisenhower, during one of his speeches to the nation, said this was the greatest book that he had ever read. And I would recommend anyone because his philosophy is just so powerful. And there's videos of him online talking about how he wrote. Because when I read his book, I read the finished product, but he would spend 3 weeks on a paragraph. And it's like when you got it, it was like, wow, he called it. He named something that we know, and we have to go to our intuition, our own experiences to be able to relate to it. A book that's had a huge impact on my life is Herman Hesse Siddhartha. It's a very powerful book. I've read that book over and over again. And the reason it was powerful for me, Daniel, is it's a book talking about the journey, the life journey. And when I read it when I was in my early 20s, I was starting out and I was in, let's say, the early chapters. And now if I reread it, I'm going to be in the later chapters and I'll be able to relate to it. And sometimes it's good going back to books that have, that have touched us, because when we go back, we're a different person. So we're going to get something out of it. And I just look at books as not being answers. They're primers to kickstart our own brain. And I've read a number of books that people wouldn't be comfortable with reading either, because I believe it's important to understand what other people are thinking. Not just people who agree with us, but people who I find like their belief system is so horrific. For example, I've read Mein Kampf, and I'm Jewish. Why would I read it? Because I want to know what another person thinks and what's influenced so many people, like a mind virus, an idea virus that impacts people. Because how do we fight against these things, or how do we remove ourselves from potential harm if we're not aware what's out there? And I think right now in our society, I believe that too many people have remained ignorant, because there's been white papers coming out in the Rockefeller Center and the World Economic Forum, in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Gabby Who, and they're very explicit what they think of you and I. And I don't agree with them, but if someone's going to plan to to shoot me, I need to at least know. So those are the books that had huge influences. Last one would be Flatland by Edwin Abbott. And that book is very powerful. And every time I read it, I get something else out of it, because it gives a different perspective to look at that world presented in the book, which is a two-dimensional world, and to look at our own world, the world we each experience.
Wow, wonderful. I mean, I love how this is just naturally unfolding. It's a conversation with books that shape us, or we shape books. This type of relationship, and then also where you're going at this from as a person standpoint. So this is really great. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to switch gears, because I feel the urge to bring Wade into the conversation. I think especially your interaction with texts, I think are going to be, you never know what Wade's going to nibble on, right? Like what kind of, usually there's something that we've said in the last little while that he's like, he's chomping on. But I want to remind any listeners out there, I want to remind them that there's, we're going to go to a commercial break. We want you to like, follow, subscribe, consult the Google Oracle about Peter Merrick, and, do the same thing, follow and like him if it makes sense, if you think he's a valuable use of your time, which I think that is the case. Okay. So anyways, and later on, for everybody, we're also doing a giveaway of Peter's book, and this is called The King of Main Street. And so listen intently to what Peter's saying and throw up a good question, because when Peter sees that right comment, he's going to award it a copy of his book later in the show. So that's where we're at. And now let's go to commercial break.
In a world increasingly disoriented and lacking spiritual values, many are turning to religion as a source of inspiration and comfort. Each person chooses their individual path, and if there is one thing we are known for, it's providing a positive platform for diverse points of view, to provide each of us the opportunity to discern truth for ourselves. Something or Other Publishing is proud to announce the creation of Royal Falcon Press imprint to feature the unparalleled talent of multiple writers who will bring uplifting and thought-provoking contributions to the body of religious literature, offering current spiritual insights and practical solutions to the challenges we face. Let's grow together as one of the most substantial spiritual communities on the internet. Register and explore a new way to achieve universal wisdom and reinforce your faith with all the surprises Royal Falcon Press has in store for you.
Peter, what a pleasure, and thank you to Dan for introducing you to our audience, and we will have Dan back on the show a little bit later. Peter, I was very intrigued by the books that you cited, and you and I talked a couple of times over the last, month or so, and I have a note here on the show to introduce you by asking you a question about the flying paper story related to the soul. And I can't remember what that means, which is good because it'll be new and fresh if you can remember what it is that story was.
Well, just to share with the audience, Wade, like we operate with certain metaphors to understand the world. We take meaning from one thing to another, and that's meta means taking over, metaphor. So we can only operate for how advanced our metaphors are. So there's a lot of changes happening right now. So I'll give a metaphor. For a while, back in the 80s and 90s, the metaphor that became very popular that people were using was a computer. You type in, something would come out. And then the first time I heard about the cloud is when Steve Jobs, and after he passed away, he just talked about the cloud. And now we think like things are outsourced, and people are now understanding that maybe your mind is not encased in your physical body. And now they have a metaphor for it. So there's a lot of things in my life that I can just do conjectures from what I understand. So the story begins like this. When I was in student government, I was elected to be a student rep on the Board of Governors of York University. And at the museum, they were having a big dinner for the real president of the university, not the student government president, for the real university president retiring. And someone was giving a speech, and it was supposed to be funny. And they were talking about, and this is in 1990-91. And back then, internet had just been introduced to universities, but not to the rest of us. So they were talking about this email thing. And I'm trying to follow what they're saying. They're saying that someone comes in, they open up their email, and it immediately is something that they have to deal with, and they send it over to so-and-so, and they look at it at their computer, and then they send it to the other side of campus, where so-and-so is participating. And I don't know what internet is, because to me, all it was the fax or a letter. So all I can imagine is this is magic paper that's flying from one desk to another. And that is the metaphor. That was the understanding I had because I didn't really experience it. And why I shared that story with you, because I understand all these things that are happening, like AI, and the fact that you've got these international bodies passing these rules and we're hearing about this demonic part of society that's into children now, and it's like the veil. It's an apocalypse. The veil is being removed. I can only operate from my experiences. I had never experienced that. I grew up, I shared with you, around Holocaust survivors because I'm Jewish. And there's stories that they would describe to me, which were horrific. It was a graphic novel in my head because I could never understood. And there's a saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. An experience, to me, is worth 1,000,000,000,000 pictures. So that's the magic paper story.
Awesome. And I think now I'm remembering the story, and thank you for refreshing my memory. And I think part of that was we were talking about spirituality and the soul, and maybe Paul's comment about seeing through a glass darkly, and how even the revealed knowledge, because this show, of course, is called Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society, even the revealed knowledge of the holy writings in describing the other world, right? The outside of the physical world to somebody who is inside the material physical world, we can't comprehend it. It's more difficult to comprehend than your comprehension of the flying paper at that moment in time. And so even the revealed knowledge about heaven, as it's called, or hell, these metaphors, right? They don't even begin to really describe what's going on. They are simply an attempt to convey some of the important content of what is being symbolized, but we really have no comprehension of what it's going to be like, uh, you know, in the afterlife when our soul passes on. Um, Now we've gone all over the place already in this conversation, but I wanted to illustrate to the audience the kind of conversations that you and I were having, and now I want to get back to some of the things you were talking about with Dan, and you mentioned how on the one hand you're reading these deep books, and on the other hand you are a broker, right, on Wall Street. It might not have been Wall Street, right? But you're a broker, and you're at that lucrative moment of time in the 90s when money is being minted by these people, right? So what was going on inside of you with this dichotomy? Was there cognitive dissonance? How did you come to rationalize or integrate those parts of you?
Well, first of all, I was very fortunate because I went independent very early on. I really did. I actually worked at a brokerage firm, and then there were some changes in the financial industry where I was able to sell different types of products, and I didn't have to work for a large institution. So I was able to set my own study. And at the time, I didn't understand what I was doing. I really wanted to become a real boy, like Pinocchio wants to become a real boy, complete. And there were certain things that didn't
Without
sit
having
right.
your nose grow, through the lying
Well,
that would otherwise be necessary.
well, I also saw what happened to a lot of people when I started out. The first job I had in the financial industry was technically a bucket shop. I never went to the floor because I would see these guys. They were selling penny stock, and they were making great money.
Right.
Maybe like back then, maybe 10, 20,000 a week.
And was
And they were going.
was that because of pump and dump practices?
Yes.
So
And
for the audience who may not know, penny stock is small, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is my layman's understanding, right? Penny stock, small companies that aren't well researched, which means they can be more easily manipulated. Also, the cost of the stock means it could be more easily manipulated.
right, because the person selling the stock is also the person who would buy the stock. So they set the price.
Right.
And there were a number of rules. Now, I started there while I got my securities license and everything. And what I saw is I would see the big brokers from throughout the industry meet at a certain bar or certain bars. And these guys here were depressed and drunks because they knew what they were selling was shit. And it didn't matter whether it was Bre-X. For those of you who don't know, Bre-X was a company that it was a gold company that had no gold. However, there were a bunch of surveyors who lied, and it raised about $12 billion. And we're talking, it was being promoted quite a bit. And I saw that and I said, I don't want to sell that because I'm not selling anything tangible. So what am I selling? I'm selling the fact that I feel good, Wade, that I provide you a service. And if I'm not a psychopath, I'm going to, if I do something wrong to you, I know I sell you something that's not good, that's going to prevent me from actually working with someone else. So it was also self-serving. And that's one thing that I discovered as well through my own search. Like, I'm good to people because they're good to me. And I don't cheat people because I don't want to be around people who cheat me. And in essence, because I was working for myself, I got to learn a lot about people because I wasn't under some corporate structure. I had to kill my own meat.
Right.
And I had to eat it. And in essence, that's one of the reasons I spent a lot of time reading. And I realized that most of the stuff I was reading in the financial industry, it was the wrong books. I'll give you an example. One book that should be required reading for anybody who invests in anything should be Madness of Crowds. Popular Delusions, Madness of Crowds. It was written in 1837 by John Mackey. And this book here talks about how people don't think.
Right.
And they just follow the crowd. And we just saw that with the housing market.
Wait, what's that current term? Mass something psychosis?
I think it's mass formation.
Mass formation psychosis, right? A modern update of that. Or Gadsod's parasitic thinking. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways of, but my concern has been that the majority of humans historically has always been wrong. And as we live in democracies where the majority rules, that's a challenge. That's a problem. We need to get better as a species at not having that madness spread. We need to get better at a species as having the good ideas infect people rather than having the bad ideas infect people.
There's one issue, and someone gave me this metaphor. There was a movie called 50 Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew
50
Barrymore.
First Dates, right? 50 First Dates. Yep.
50. So the problem is with humanity is we're like the Drew Barrymore character.
She couldn't remember things, right?
Right, but every day was a reset. And the problem is every generation is a reset. So by the time we become clever, it's our time to leave this casing.
You know, part of me now asks, that's an interesting thought. Part of me now asks, is there some intent with that divine providence has structured us such that over and over and over again, every generation has the same challenge and the same opportunity and the span of a lifetime. I mean, you think about King David, or maybe it was Solomon who talked about man's limit being, 70, and if peradventure, if God looks with favor upon 80. In other words, man lives to be 70 or 80 years old, and that's the span of life that we have, and that is he also said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. That is the span of life that is allotted to us to learn the lessons that we have to live while we're here. That is our gestation period. That is our 9 months in this material womb. And each of us has that same development opportunity over and over and over again, like Groundhog Day, another movie that plays on that same theme.
Well, I'll take it a little out of context. Anybody read Animal Farm knows that there's a saying that some animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Now, I'm going to share with you how I look at that statement. Each of us have the potential to self-actualize. Many are called, few choose to act. And for me, going back to the metaphors, one of the movies I always think of is Close Encounters of the
Third
Third
Kind
Kind.
with Richard
And the reason,
Dreyfuss.
Richard Dreyfuss. And the reason why I believe that's such a
Shall we
powerful
whistle the
metaphor.
tune, right? Right,
You're
those
good.
5 notes.
Well, I just want to share with you what I get from it and going and related to that saying from Animal Farm. Many millions of people got the call to go and meet the extraterrestrials. It's only Richard Dreyfuss who goes through all that difficulty to get there, and he goes there. We all have the call. We all have these senses in our life that there's something greater, there's something more important, and I've come to terms it's my soul. What's my soul worth? And the problem is people shut off to their souls or they sell their souls. And when you actually understand that life is finite, then your soul is something that you should not, it's not yours to sell. And if you try to sell it, you're going to, it's terrible. Now, I want to just add something to that, Wade, is when I was younger, I was in situations where I could have easily gone and become a member of the World Economic Forum when I was 20, 30, and even 40. I was in situations where if I had pushed forward, I would have ended up being invited. I would never go now. And I wrote something today, which, well, I'm going to let you ask me a question, but I'd like to address it in a bit.
No, I'm listening. I would like to know what you wrote today.
So what I wrote today is years ago, I read something that talked about why Moses had a stutter. And the story goes like this. He's pre-verbal. He's a little boy. He's playing with Pharaoh, and he grabs Pharaoh's crown. And all Pharaoh's advisors are saying, this is a bad omen. He wants your crown. You have to put him to death. And one of the advisors is a little smarter than the rest. Maybe we have someone in government who's a little smarter than the rest of them. He says, no, he's a child. Let's do a test. Let's take the crown, all this gold jewelry, and we'll put it into one area. And on the other area, we'll have hot coals. So this is the test. If he goes for the crown, we don't know Moses. He's dead. He's killed. If he goes for the coals, he gets to live. Moses wants the crown. He's reaching towards it, and an angel comes. Now, Moses isn't aware of this, but he bumps him, and he ends up picking up a coal, and he burns his tongue. And he's now got a stutter. And that disability made him, a much more humane human being. And I look at that story and I look at it from a metaphor. Like it has such great meaning for me because you can read it as it actually happened or you could read it as a metaphor. I believe many of us who things didn't turn out the way we wanted, and this is what I wrote about, we were being kept on the bench for this moment. And I truly believe that if you woke up this morning, just like I woke up, we have not served our purpose, because as soon as we serve our purpose, there's no more reason for us to be here.
We won't
There's
be
no more
waking up.
reason.
No, I agree with you. I would have gotten there from a little bit of a different route, but I 100% agree with you. There's an opportunity for us. There's something that we have to give, but there's also something we have to take. There's something we need to learn. There's something that if we don't learn it now, it will be very, very difficult to learn it later. In this material world, in this material, you think about it as a studies in terms of, childhood and adolescent development, there's this super learning phase. right? And once you go through that super learning phase, if you have not been given the opportunity to learn the kinds of lessons that you should be learning at age 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 8 years, if you don't, if you're not given opportunity at those times, you have what's called arrested development, right? You will spend the rest of your life with a deficit that you're trying to overcome. And I believe that is even more the case in the next life, right? There are certain things that if we don't develop them now, when we get into this, by the way, I'm a Baha'i. I got to say that, and this is a Baha'i concept. But this is the womb, and we must develop the limbs, the organs, the eyes, the mouth in the womb. And if we're not developing them in the womb and you're born, you will never have them. You will be disadvantaged. It will be a disability. You can overcome it, right? And there are many amazing examples of people who are overcoming unbelievable handicaps in this life. But it will be the same thing when we pass on into the next world. So being kept alive while we are malleable in this physical form is important. To be given the opportunity to make those changes inside ourselves, to have our soul be worked on and be cleansed and purified now through this physical experience.
Well, every day we wake up is a new opportunity. We're here. And that's so powerful. I remember once watching a movie, and it was very powerful. It had Al Pacino in it and McConaughey. I can't remember the name of the movie, but Al Pacino is a company that, tells people how to bet. And he ends up taking McConaughey, who gives like recommendations on television, how to bet. And he says, come with me. He takes him to Gamblers Anonymous. And he's talking about how it's been 10 years since he laid a bet, because now he's getting other people to lay bets for him and they pay him for advice. So someone notices him. And this is, for me, one of the strongest, most powerful lines I ever heard. He then confronts them and he says, you're not addicted to winning. You're addicted to losing, because every time that you lose and you wake up the next morning, you're alive. You feel alive, and that's what everybody wants, because there's an issue. It doesn't matter if someone has $1 zillion or if someone has $5. The zillionaire might be not feeling alive, while the other one has great relationships, enjoys the outdoors. And the other thing I want to add, which I believe is a key, is forgiveness, and being forgiving, not just of other people, of yourself. This is school. You didn't know. Now you know. Now the question is, what are you going to do with it? And then if you can forgive yourself, and you can forgive other people. I remember years ago, someone I know, and I was younger, and I'm going, God, he's really easygoing about, all these other people. And, wow, because he had been stretched, because he had fallen down. And to understand that you're human and everyone else is human. And in this day and age, everybody puts on this persona, and nothing's new. The Greeks used to talk about putting on masks. We're human, we fail. The question is, do we have what it takes to get up? And the reason I always liked working with entrepreneurs, because I believe entrepreneurs gave themselves the greatest gift of all, the potential, the possibility to self-actualize. Not that they're self-actualizing, but because they have to rub up against the environment, they have the potential and the possibility to go and grow, because they have to kill their own food or they're going to starve.
That's a great point to leave it on. We're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, I want to dive a little bit deeper into that and talk a little bit about actions that we can and should take right now, and the difference between having a fish brought to us and learning to fish, and what that has to do with soul development. Stay tuned, everyone. We're going to go to a commercial break, and we'll have more with Peter Merrick when we get back.
and welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Welcome back. I'm here with author Peter Merrick, and we will be giving away a copy of his book, The King of Main Street. We have not had many comments yet tonight. I know the audience is out there. I think it's because they're mesmerized, Peter, with everything that you've been talking about. So right before the break, we were talking about entrepreneurs and self-actualizing and having to kill what you eat, and that being alive, right? So in this show being titled Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society, there's a lot of discussion and debate about how society should be structured in simplistic terms, perhaps a caricature of it, capitalism versus socialism. Now that's a caricature, it's an oversimplification, but this idea of that society should take care of you, or as John Kennedy, I think it was, who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Oh, isn't that a quaint old saying, right? From several lifetimes ago. The debate about that rages today. Without getting into economic theory, let's talk about the personal individual level and this idea of self-actualization, and why you said a little while ago that you liked working with entrepreneurs because of the challenges and the opportunity that they saw, which motivated them to take on the challenges that they faced.
And they've also had really great experiences because, again, people forget that business and going out to the store and talking to people or driving, it's all school. It's you get to learn, you get to grow. And regarding something about capitalism, but I would be a traditional liberal, where you would have minimum government and you would also have people being able to be free. And capitalism, to me, is a good thing, not crony capitalism. And this is something that people don't understand the difference of. Crony capitalism is where the government says you have monopoly. The government goes and gives contracts to their friends. That's crony capitalism. And guess who used it? Hitler used it. The fascism basically was a socialist state, which basically put it off to the companies to actually provide the war apparatus for Germany. And this is something we've discovered here. Unfortunately, that the government was telling Google and Facebook and everyone to censor. And they were putting it off. That's crony capitalism. Real capitalism, if I create a pizzeria in Chicago and it's good, Wade, you can buy it, and if it's good and I give you great service, you're going to come back and you're going to tell your friends. If I treat you like crap, you're never going to come back to me. It basically is a way that we really get to vote, and it's a real vote. It's not voting for some president or some prime minister that is so far away from us. I'm voting by
who is going to determine what the ingredients are that are allowed on a pizza.
Well, guess what? If people start dying from eating your pizza, then you're not going to have any customers. See,
right.
It's in the self-interest, and this goes back to the same thing. Self-interest isn't a bad thing because I want you to like me. I want you to do business with me. I want you to talk to me. People make it seem like capitalism, like, oh, I want to screw you. Like, be serious. If I'm an asshole to you or Daniel, you guys are never going to talk to me again. you're not going to have an idea, and you're not going to float it. You're not going to include me. And I just want to share one study that sticks in my mind. Back in the 70s, it's a study, it's a computer program. It's called Tit for Tat. Have you heard of it, Wade?
Nope.
So what they did is they had 3 strategies, and they wanted to find out which strategy won. Again, it's called Tit for Tat. The first strategy is that as soon as you approached me, I hit you. And that's all I did. The second approach is if I hit you, I wouldn't do anything. And the third approach is I let you hit me, but I go and take you out. And they found out that the one that watched and saw how the other person behaved or the other program behaved and mimicked it, those were the strategies that worked. And that is something that I applied to my life. I will approach everyone with an open hand. However, if they violate me, my natural laws, and it's something serious, I'm not going to put up with it. And I believe capitalism is the same way. I go to a restaurant, I want good service. If they do not treat me well, I won't go back to them. If they food poison me, I'm going to tell everybody. So there's an interest, and we have such a, how would I put it? We have like an environment that's robust. We have an economy that's robust. And I believe that leaving human beings to their own to go and have good relationships. I'll give you an example. You're Baha'i, or let's say someone has a church and they need a new church. They're not getting government funding. They're going to people who see the value in that church, and they're in that community. They're going to come together. It's not the government, taxing people. These people want it, and they participate in it. And people think, oh, we need the government to do it. But what that does is we abdicate our responsibility to something we don't even know. Have you ever met people who work for the government? I've met people who work for the government, and I'm thinking, but collectively, they're good and they're caring. But I've seen these people. Not to say anything bad about it.
Well, I'm reminded of a song by David Byrne, Talking Heads, Don't Worry About the Government. Some civil servants are just like your loved ones. They work so hard and they try to be strong. Right? He wrote a very positive song about governments and civil servants. And I love it because it sounds like he's being incredibly sarcastic. And he's not. He's not. He's describing them in his optimal vision of who they are. And he's talking, it's from the album More Songs About Buildings and Food. And the refrain is take the highway, park and visit the building. Come up and see me. I'll be working. But if you come see me, I'll put down what I'm doing. My friends are important. And then he talks about, we all have buildings to help us, and he's talking about centralized government, and he's singing the praises to it. And it just sounds incredibly sarcastic. It's kind of an interesting piece of art. And I love David Byrne and the Talking Heads. But my point is, yes, the government is coercive by nature, right? When you read the Bible, Israel wanted a king because they wanted to be like the nations around them. And they were warned that they shouldn't want a king. No, you don't really want a king. And they said, yes, we do. And then he said, if you have a king, this is what the king's going to do. And they said, we don't care. We want one anyway. Right. And as we've talked about on this show, religion must inspire, not coerce. This is what you were getting at earlier. If religion inspires, you will wish to be a part of it. You will wish to submit yourself to its ordinances because it inspires you to do so. But it's a voluntary choice. Religion must never coerce. But even Jesus said that Caesar wields a sword. And, beware lest you offend Caesar because he wields a sword. And it's almost like we don't have a choice, right? As we become 7 billion people on this planet, And as we evolve towards ever more complex layers of relationships between individuals, communities, and institutions, we have to evolve more complex sets of laws and rules. You're an expert in Canadian and American intertax. I lived and worked in Germany for 7 years, and I had to file tax returns in both countries because of this mutual agreement and understanding between the countries of Germany and America, and a reciprocal agreement about who got to collect taxes, how and why, right? Because they could enforce it. They could forcibly take your money from you, and they could put you in jail if you didn't pay it, right?
Welcome to being an American, because do you know that the United States is the only country in the world that requires their citizens to pay them treasure, even though they're not living there? No other country does that. That's what you get when you have the world's largest army. You can go in there and grab guys like you wait for not paying.
Yeah, it's like any other country, the cost benefit analysis is let them run, right? But I'm not against agreeing to abide by rules and setting up organizations and institutions that have the right to enforce those rules. But the devil is in the details. I think this may be a good time to bring on our philosopher friend and fellow Canadian. By the way, full disclosure, I was also born in Canada. Of the three of us, I may be the only American citizen. I don't know. Is that true?
I'm just a green card holder, so yes.
Well, there you go. So I'm an American. We have three stages of evolution here, or is it devolution? Right? We were all three born in Canada. Dan is still living resident in Canada. You have migrated out of Canada. You're a green card holder, but I'm the one who has American citizenship.
Taking the plunge.
Interesting.
I will say that in circles that seem unavoidable, there's a Canadian feeling of like anti-Americanism that kind of floats around.
Absolutely. My joke for decades has been, what is the national identity of a Canadian? And the answer is not American.
Yeah, just whatever it is.
Can I share something with you, gentlemen?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I have a different perspective, because I'm like the ex-girlfriend now, because I was a Stepford wife. For those of you who don't know, it was a movie back in the 70s where they programmed the women just to say, "I love you, honey, you're the best," and they didn't think. And that's what I was as a Canadian. We have healthcare. We say that we do paper ballots, that we didn't do bailouts for our banks, and we've got healthcare, and we see all these great things to ourselves. When we look at the States and we say, "Oh, they're less civilized. They have guns." Like, oh my God, it's like all these things. And how do Canadians delude themselves? And this is how I did to myself. That's terrible. I got stuck with my nose being like. So, going back to the the bailouts that happened back in 2008, the Canadian government moved $82 billion, which was equivalent to $50 billion in the States. They moved it over to the equivalent of Fannie Mae. So Canadians didn't know that we took on all this debt, right? It just sort of happened because Canadians are placid. Canadians talk about how we use paper ballots. Well, those paper ballots, when you sign them, they put them into a scanner, which is a Dominion scanner. So we don't know what happens after that. And we talk about our health care. Well, the reason they were able to know whether someone participated in the apple juice shot is because every single Canadian has their health card, and they were able to centralize, and they would know, and they had people call. And on top of that, Canadians talk about the Charters of Rights and Freedoms. They learned during COVID, because many Canadians went to court, they learned that it wasn't a bunch of rights. It was a bunch of privileges that could be suspended, while the United States has a constitution. And again, Wade, you mentioned about democracies. Democracies are bad because that's mob rule. You need to have a republic or a constitutional government governed by laws. And I think that's the terrible thing that's happened. And during COVID, I read the US Constitution, Thomas Paine, the Federalist Papers, and the Declaration of Independence. And I have such an appreciation for the genius that wrote those documents. It was divinity to me because they came together and they put that down. And now we're being tested because as a Canadian, we don't have the rights. Brian Pickford, who's the only living signer of the Canadian Constitution in 1982, was denied travel, even though it's put in the Constitution that every Canadian has a right to travel. So I'm sorry for going on a rant, but
well, I think it's a necessary one, and it's one of those where it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and in today's era of, I'll call it corporate, but to your point earlier about fascism and government control, it's not really corporate, it's not capitalist control, right? It's a symbiotic relationship between capitalism and government. In today's control of the narrative around what America is has shifted dramatically from America being a beacon on a hill, a light on a hill, to America being a pit of darkness, right? With a mortal sin, a sin at birth that can't be washed away, right? The narrative around what America is today has shifted radically and dramatically in the last 40 to 60 years. I talked today with a gentleman who wrote a book about Harry Truman. We'll have him actually on the show. Here's a plug for a future show. Harry Truman, who was the wartime president during World War II, and his efforts at battling corruption and seeking a bipartisan relationship during that period of time. And of course, this is debated, and this is, he's not, people weren't kind to him in the wake of his presidency and in the wake of World War II. And I guess I kind of lost exactly where I was going exactly with the comment about Harry Truman, but it's getting into the role and the nature of America as a beacon of hope, as a destination for the huddled masses of the planet to escape from the tyrannies and the failure of society and the failure of civilization elsewhere, rather than some kind of, horrible power that oppressed, that conquered and oppressed. That's not really the history of America.
Yeah, no, I think it's underappreciated. I love America. I think as Canadians, we should be very thankful that they're our neighbors. Right?
We didn't need an army because we had them.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, if you look at America, I've called them the benevolent dictator. Okay, for whatever reason in history, we've come to this point in time. Could it have been better, different? Yeah, sure, maybe. Okay, right. But you look at it and you say to yourself, we live in the most prosperous time ever. Right? Like the things that I take for granted, kings and queens didn't have, right? I mean, and I'm not even getting into medical advances and things like anesthetic and humanitarian sort of things. I'm talking about the general well-being of people has really, really increased. No, sure,
large numbers of people, because what the kings had, they had because of the servitude of their subjects, right? Subjects. Whereas people may not feel free today, and certainly our freedoms are at risk, as you pointed out, Peter. But they're only at risk because they were had for a while, right? They were realized for a while, and only at this time in human history have they been realized. History is a constant. You talked about earlier in the show how the young, by the time the young are old, they're gone, they're out of the picture, and then the next generation is learning the same lesson over and over and over again. But this happens at a larger scale too. The rise and fall of empires over time, and the enslavement, the abdication and the enslavement of the masses happening over and over and over again cyclically. And at this point in our evolution, striving towards the point where we can structure society so that that's not how it ends. That's not where it goes. And we're struggling with that right now.
I think we've been on this horse before. We just have amnesia. There's so much in our history we don't know. There's so much that does not make sense. I just want to give you an example that I bet the two of you are not aware of this, because for me it blew my mind. When I say Isaac Newton, what do you think of?
An apple, of course.
But he came up with geometry, and he tells us about gravity. I didn't know that he was in charge of the Bank of England. Did this guy even exist? Because he must have been like superhuman, right? Because he was like figuring out incredible physics, and at the same time, our current monetary system is based on what Newton actually did, because he ran the Bank of England back when he was alive. And I'm thinking, how is that possible? The thing is, I can talk about my grandfather and tell you how he's the wisest guy, the smartest guy ever. He's not around. You can't check it out. Everybody who knew him isn't around. And there's so much we don't know. But what we do know is we know what we feel. And I truly believe those who choose to connect to their soul, to God, to whatever, they'll know what to do. And for those who are vibrating at a very low level, where I would call myself before the last 3 years, I was a materialist, and my religion was materialism, and most of the people surrounding me were the same. It didn't matter if they were Jewish, if they were Black, Hindu, Christian. Those were just names that were like really far down on the list of identifying themselves. Their identity is what trips they went on to, what cars they have, what areas they lived in, and they were so identified with the religion of materialism. And you can't take it with you. You come in like a sponge, and most people are like bumblebees, and they start flapping their wings because everybody else is doing it, and they don't even ask why they're doing it. And I believe, and this is what I applaud you, both Daniel and Wade, for having this program to deal with these issues about there's got to be something more than me having a Porsche, or me having a beautiful house, a cottage, a place on the Intercoastal in Florida, or somewhere in Malibu, because it really doesn't mean anything. And I've been to third world countries, and these people have families, and they have communities, and they're a lot more healthier and happier than people I know who are worth $1 billion.
Well said. Well said. With that, I'm going to go to another commercial break and remind our audience once again, get those comments in, receive a free book from our guest, Peter Merrick. And when we come back, we'll be wrapping this up, because we're already a little bit into overtime. However, I think it's been well worth it. Here's a little ad from one of our current co-hosts and his organization, his media platform company, based on philosophy, up in Canada. Stay tuned.
Recognizes the transformative potential of combining art and technology, creating a platform that celebrates synergy. Joining Plancksit means becoming part of a vibrant community that thrives on intellectual discourse, creative collaboration, and idea exploration. Whether you're a writer or an artist or simply passionate about culture, Planksip offers membership plans tailored to your needs. So unlock your creative potential with personalized content co-creation and guidance from Planksip founder, Daniel Sanderson. That's me. Choose from 3 pathways: participate in the Writers Cooperative Competition, host a video podcast series, or utilize our publishing services. Gain official contributor status, publication opportunities, advanced literary analysis tools, and free content creation services. Join Planksip today and explore the fusion of art and technology. Share ideas and nurture your creative pursuits. Embark on a journey of artistic discovery, intellectual growth, and creative collaboration in an ever-evolving landscape of art and technology.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah,
These are such great commercials.
Well, the funny thing is that I get so embarrassed by that commercial every time, and Wade had me going because I could just look at the show and see which one's coming up next, right? And he's, oh, we have one from a co-producer, and I was actually thinking, because
you were expecting a great commercial, and then you saw yourself.
No, I was thought maybe Cameron put one together, right? Oh. We're doing some stuff with Cameron, and then he said philosophy. I was like, oh, it's that one. Okay, yes.
Well, yes, we have had a guest here on the show, Cameron, and he runs the Cameron Journal, and we are working together to bring great voices like yours, Peter, and great perspectives. So, what I want to do now, as we go towards the end of here, is make it very real. Get very real. We've talked about a lot of things, just really important, valuable, powerful things. But Dan started out with, what shaped Peter, and now I want to dive deep and say, how does Peter apply this? What does it look like in your life? We put in the plug for the show the role of ethical and moral insights into society as a safeguard against materialism. And Peter Merrick shares his perspectives on the pros and cons of following one's own moral compass. So what does that moral compass look like? If the crowd, if the masses tend towards madness, tend towards making wrong decisions, tend towards, running off cliffs like lemmings, how does one then follow one's own? How does one listen to one's own moral compass and not have it bent away from true north by the collective magnetism of the vibrations around us?
Spend time with yourself. For me, I wake up every morning and I spend about 2.5 hours writing. And that's how Dan and Wade, we got in contact. I wrote something on the 10 levels or the stages of genocide. And you do not, when people are like practicing football and all that stuff, and then they play the game, unless you've mentally practiced and gamed it out and asked yourself some serious questions about yourself, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to catch that ball in and get the touchdown if you haven't practiced. You're not going to be able to, have a great performance. In Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure 2, the symbol I have
right up there with Siddhartha, right up there with Siddhartha.
Yeah, well, no, but you can find wisdom
absolutely
everywhere. So here are these 2 guys who are just buffoons. They're idiots,
right?
And they're going to play at this concert, and we're told that this concert they changed the world. And they get up on stage, and they've got a time machine or a machine that can take them away from this, and they realize they suck. So what do? They go in the time machine and they come back like 2 seconds later, but they got beards like ZZ Top because they spent the time and they perfected themselves. And again, we all can be perfected, but we can't be perfected if we look out there.
Right.
You have to look in here. And in essence,
well, and so if we're sitting, all day like this, you're saying that's not the answer. If we're just looking into our device here?
Well, it depends on, I don't believe that's something that's wise, but if you're sitting and you see something, you see like a tree, and you go and you sit and you just want, there was something about it that has beauty, or you saw, and again, I talk about the magic paper at the beginning. It's
Right.
your metaphors. So in essence, if I've never crossed a path, I'll give you an example. If I've never, when I do my public speaking, it's a requirement that I get to the room before I speak, because I walk the room. So when I get in front of a large group of, let's say, 500, 1,000 people, I'm not going to get scared to go and step in a place I hadn't done, because I have body memory. The same thing is my mental memory, my spiritual memory. And the only way that you're going to do that is actually spend time with yourself. If you're looking at the phone and you're reading other people's stuff, if you're listening to other people's music, if you're following someone else's course, the only thing you're not doing is you're not playing your own music, and you're not doing your own course of study, and you're not being true to yourself. And that goes back to what I was sharing. Life is school. We're not perfect. We fall. The question is, are you going to try to fall forward? Or are you going to fall backward? Are you going to run away?
Well, this brings to mind a couple of things. The first one is one of my favorite quotes. I don't know who said this, but it's one of my current favorite quotes. It's a recent favorite, and that is, we do not rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. Right? That's another way of saying what you've said. And what kind of training are we doing? How are we spending our time? What exactly are we training to be? Right? And the second thing I want to share is, this is a Baha'i quote. Now I'm gonna pick up this device that I just decried, but I happen to have an app on here that quickly lets me find things. So there's good. Technology is neutral, right? Technology is neutral. So this is the second hidden word in the Baha'i faith. This is from Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if you desire me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. It gets at one of the fundamental principles of the Baha'i faith, which is the independent investigation of the truth. There's no clergy in the Baha'i faith. There's no formal indoctrination program. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. Now, it's a simple statement. You could think a lot about it. How is it that justice helps you see through your own eyes and not through the eyes of your neighbor, right? I guess that's the essential question of this quote. But the quote holds forth the promise of seeing things with your own eyes and not seeing it through the eyes of others, which kind of gets at that quote about the madness of crowds to me.
In the what is it, the saying, in the land of the blind, the
one-eyed man
is the king.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. The justice piece resonated a lot for me on this, as I've been doing some meditations today when I'm thinking about justice. I mean, it's everywhere through the Republic, and I think I think what happens in the act or art of philosophizing for me is that I intuitively practice Plato's method, which is to collect and then stream down, simplify, universalize, try and reduce into something abstract that has enough form that would encompass something universal, right? So he consistently asks all the time, what is justice? What is justice? Where do I find it? How do I find it? And what I've come to realize is that it is a very inward looking thing, but we have kind of a perverse society really. If you want to compare, really sketch it out. The words from Socrates when you walk into when you walk into that Delphic sacred place, right, where the Delphi um, lives, right? When you walk in there, you've got this sign that says "Know thyself." And our perverse society will look at that, I'm included. You kind of, oh, you kind of have to know, what is that? What is yourself? What is that? What is this? What are you talking about? Like, what is, and, Peter brought this real kind of interesting Cartesian litmus test. And I'll bring that up here in a minute, which I was really impressed with, by the way. Anyways, when really what they're saying in know thyself is actually, I want you guys to focus on knowledge. You have the self-knowledge within you. You actualize the knowledge right through yourself. You know what is good and what is, I could say, evil, right? But we also know what is not good, right? Okay. We know the opposite. It's an easier way to look at it. And the thing about justice is that I think you need to acknowledge that we live in a pluralistic society. There's people, we have to get along with groups. And part of making your declaration to your fellow citizens, okay, is that you're saying, here was my participation and here's how I account for it, really. And if you're justified in your account, putting something on the record, basically, it's like, I've got this to be grateful for, and here's what I've done with it. That's the ideal form of justice. It's an accountability to your community. I'm incredibly fortunate, but here's my tithing, right? Here's how I justify, my position and my contributions based off of. We can take a biological argument too, based off of my genetic disposition, and some say I have no free will, which whatever, I mean, but whatever it is, the process is still the same. There's still this like massive play of experience and participation and engagement that needs to take place. How's that resonate with you, Peter?
It does. I know that in my tradition, charity, there's no word for charity. It's called justice. It's like you do well, you have to take care of other people. But it's something that has to come from within, because the problem that I find is when you have some overarching authority, what's that saying, like power corrupts and absolute power corrupt absolutely. And that's the problem. Like, we have to go back to our community, to our families, because what's happened over the last 60 years, the only thing that keeps the society going is family and community, and that's been completely attacked over the last 60 years. And this is the problems that we have. However, there's enough people who have said they can't live this debauchery. Like, for example, Jordan Peterson wouldn't have followers if they didn't have young men saying, I want to be responsible. I'm sick and tired of being irresponsible. And there's enough people who are coming to that understanding that they basically have had, they've been heathenists, and now they want to find something. And the one thing that I caution people is there's a lot of charlatans out there. That's why you have to follow your own compass, because all these people and all these great faiths, they all had solitary moments where they had inspiration. If I'm going to use the entrepreneur part, they're the entrepreneur. And these institutions, these religions end up having these MBAs come in and institutionalize it and talk about what that feeling of inspiration was like for those individuals. If you read what they say everybody can have it. you can find your bliss and also not harm other people. And that's my spirituality. Finding my bliss, not harming another person, and at the same time, you try to harm me, I'm going to have an issue. That's really simple. And if you harm the people around me, then I'm going to have an issue. And the problem that I face right now, and many of us, is there's been such an encroachment on our rights and civil liberties that I took for granted, that many of us took for granted. It's now time that we have to stand up. And everybody was waiting, and everyone was saying, "Oh, follow the plan." You know what the plan is? You being responsible. You're the cavalry, not some white hats. You're it, and you start off by being a good person. And guess what? Morality is contagious. It's contagious. It's been proved in sociological studies. There's something called broken windows. As soon as a window is broken, you fix it. As soon as a train is spray painted, you paint it. And guess what happens? People treat their environments and other people with respect. But if you let it decay, then it becomes San Francisco.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peter. I think we're over time, but it has been well worth it. And I want to thank you for those last comments, summing up nicely a good hour plus romp through all kinds of ethical, moral, spiritual, and material concepts. Peter, I do hope that we will have you back in the near future. I want to mention a couple of shows coming up. I already mentioned the history of Harry Truman. That's actually an NPR editor who's written a book. We also have next week Barbara Brehan, who has written a trilogy, and she's a pastor of a church in Virginia. And she'll be here next week talking about her perspective on nature and plants and what they teach us about our spiritual growth. We also have another pastor coming up in a few weeks who's going to talk about forgiveness versus punishment. So we've got a lot of great shows coming up. I wanted to sort of get those plugs in. Peter, I'd love to have you back in the near future. It's been a pleasure. Dan, Peter, any final last words of wisdom before we wrap up for tonight? Anything that you just got to get out?
You guys just have the best commercials. Very professional, I have to tell you. It's really
well.
And I love Dan. I love that hat.
Yeah.
Hey, Peter, we'd like to make a commercial for you too when we have you back for your book. So we do have a great team that works on those, and we'll pass those comments along. Thank you, everyone. This is your host Wade Franson, co-host Daniel Sanderson, and Peter Merrick, signing off on episode 60 of Created in the Image of God. Same time every week. Please click, like, subscribe. Unfortunately, the audience was not robustly participating tonight. We'll look on the YouTube channel for comments after the fact and find somebody to give away a copy of Peter's book to. We're not going to get to that tonight. Hope to see everybody here next week. Until then, stay safe.